we still are looking for sign off from your council to get going on that process. But other than
Mhm.
that, we're in pretty good shape.
So is there something that I need to take to them to get signed off or?
I think Dave Wellman will probably handle the outreach to your council
Oh, okay.
president.
Okay.
My understanding is they wanted you to kind of experience this meeting
Yes.
and kind of give feedback on the process and what you've learned before they make that
Yeah.
determination.
Correct.
I'll yield the floor.
All right, if there are no questions on the Transit Development District boundaries, I will then pass the things over to Vince and Joe from KPMG, who are going to talk about the TDD program guide that we sent a few weeks ago for everybody to, the draft of that for everybody to take a look at. And we can have a chat about that. So Vince, stage is yours.
Yeah, good afternoon, all, and thank you for taking the time today. I heard some people have some time constraints, so we'll try and move through things quickly but efficiently. Apologize for I'm not going to stay on video just because I'm trying to work from my phone. I wasn't able to be in my office. But as Dave said, we're going to talk about the TDD program guide briefing. Dave, as we move to slide number 9, just a quick disclaimer: this guide it's a living document. It contains the contents are guidelines and informational. It's not intended to provide any legal advice. We're not opining on what statutes say as much as give guidance to the communities as to how the TDD program intends to operate, how when they're seeking funds, how they would apply, how that process would work, and as they work with their developers. We will the RDA will attempt to update it as time goes on if there's changes to rules or as things are learned, when we know that every project's going to be a little bit different. So with that, we'll move into slide number 10. So the guide really kind of deals with 3 issues. The first is describing the eligibility criteria for TDD financial assistance. It lays out, who's eligible for that assistance and how it would work, how the application process works. I think one thing of note within the eligibility criteria is the intent with the TDD or application for TDD funds is that it will come from an eligible projects, but it will actually come from the governmental local unit. So the way we've structured this is that if there's a developer who wants to seek TDD funds, they have to work with the city or the town, the local unit first, and then come to meet with the RDA. We don't want a situation where a developer is coming to meet with the RDA, proposing a development that the city is not, or the city or the town is not supportive of. So the actual application needs to come through the city and town. It can be produced with the city, the developer can write it and stuff, but we want the opportunity for you to work together. So as the last second bullet says under number 1, any private entity seeking or requiring TDD financial assistance from the RDA will collaborate with the applicant, and that's the local government unit is the applicant. The next part of it is it describes the application process. Prior to submitting an application, the guide recommends that the applicant and if there is a private developer, they come to meet with the RDA, talk about the project so everybody understands what it is. They can understand if it's eligible, how it is eligible, and what's needed in the application process. And then the last part is really the guide provides a description of the financial assistance tools available. And so within that, just kind of the different options that are intended for financial assistance via the TDD. I think, so within that, as we said, the kind of really comes down to there are 2 types of projects, and you'll hear me talk, or you'll read the guide and it'll talk about revenue generating and non-revenue generating. So revenue generating project is one that would create increment directly. That would be, be a development that has, a housing development or industrial development of that type, where the property taxes will go up. There will be incremental income taxes created. Those are revenue creating. Non-revenue creating non-increment creating or non-revenue creating projects. They may be the improvements to a sewer line, which will then facilitate some type of revenue creating project. So that's what we mean by non-revenue or non-increment generating projects. So moving to the next slide, Dave, number 11. So in terms of eligibility requirements for TDD financial assistance, there's really three things. It comes down to who the eligible applicants are, what the eligible development projects are, and the eligible project costs. And as I described, the eligible applicant really is the local government. That's who's actually applying for the TDD assistance. They can come for that with a developer, but the actual agreement or the actual funding would be provided to the applicant itself. And as I noted, the intention here is to make sure that the city or the local government unit is supportive of the project which is seeking the financial assistance. As far as eligible development projects, as I mentioned, the projects can be increment creating or non-increment creating, but they need to be projects. They're intended to be projects who are going to benefit economic growth within the TDD district. These again can be, as you can see in the sub bullets, but they can be housing, they can be affordable housing, they can be workforce housing, it can be industrial projects, it can be commercial projects. All those type of projects can be included. They're eligible for TDD assistance. And the last is eligible project costs. And this is actually what our eligible project costs are set out in the legislation. But really it comes to most project costs, design costs, development costs, actual construction improvement costs, all those type of costs are eligible project costs. The things which are limited would be things like success fees paid to the developer. Those type of costs would not be eligible costs. But the legislation provides us good guidance on that. So I'll stop there for a second to see if there's any questions.
Yes, I did have one quick question on that, where you had mentioned housing. So if I recall from our meeting at the town, that would be not a single family. It have to be multi-family housing.
Correct.
Okay, and is there is a limit, I believe? Does it have to be like a quad or more, or can it be a duplex?
I think, to be honest, I think David said at that time it needed to be a quadplex, but we can confirm that for you.
It would
Okay.
be anything that isn't paying the 1% tax, which is assigned to single family. So essentially any of those products, which includes, in some cases, townhomes, if you have enough of them, that are paying that 2% or higher tax rate is what could be eligible for inclusion within the TDD and contribute increment in that regard.
Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a big apartment complex.
It could be small in scale.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about non-increment producing elements of a project. So on a previous slide, it talked about revenue generating projects and then non-revenue. So if we did have sewer, like the costs of that sewer within the TDD boundary would have to be basically carried by the increment that would be produced by the project that the sewer is serving. So it's intended to be like a self-funded project, and then the infrastructure improvements would be part of that. So it would just take some of the increment from the revenue producing project and direct it towards repaying bonds or whatever for the infrastructure. Is that correct?
Yes, and I say that hesitantly. The funds don't necessarily have to be directly tied. So if you're putting sewer in, and that will result in somebody building a new manufacturing facility, but in order to do that, you needed sewer. It does not have to be a dollar for dollar match, so that the project that you're facilitating with the new sewer, it doesn't have to produce $1 million per year of increment in order, because the sewer is going to cost $1 million per year. It's all within the TDD itself. So it doesn't have to be, if your question is that, it doesn't have to be directly tied, but the intention is that by updating the sewer, you are helping to facilitate an increment creating project.
And then
Okay.
Vince, the only thing I'll add is we do have confirmation from legal that if you have a TDD boundary and you have a non-revenue generating property, or let's say road right away, you can spend the TDD increment within that area for a project such as sewer. The other flexibility that I could see happening is, let's say, use the example of a large sewer project. You may have multiple revenue sources, both TDD and TIF, going towards that bond, and there could be some opportunities and creativity in that regard. So,
Okay, so anytime that there's a project that would come in, the RDA team would look at the increment from the entire TDD and understand kind of the carrying capacity of the entire district for the project that is proposed.
Yes, that would be the intention.
Okay.
and would work with the local units. So the local units would be the ones that would be bringing the projects to the RDA and saying, hey, we need to tap into our TDD increment to build this sewer to get this project done. We support this. And then the RDA would do their analysis as part of that.
Okay.
Kind of a question I have similar on the lines. What happens if we wanted to structure a project for a residential development and that they are going to construct an open space that ultimately we want to take over as a public park? How would that play into this?
If
So
it's
what
in
you're saying is that if it's in the TDD, then it should be eligible. I mean, depending on the details of always on the details. But if you're saying you're supporting the overall, you're supporting the residential project itself, which would be increment creating if there's a park and it gets taken over by the local unit, I think that works.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, any capital expenditure that would be allowed under TIF statute in general would be allowed under TDD statute. So parks, trails, etc. would be an eligible capital expense, not maintenance or programming, but capital.
Moving to the next slide, so slide number 12. So on this slide, we've kind of laid out the process. As I mentioned, there's kind of on the far left, you have the request for a pre-application consultation. So the local unit, and if there's a developer, the local unit developer would come in, meet with the RDA, talk about the project. I think the intention here is just to be beneficial so that somebody doesn't put in an application for projects which don't meet the eligible criteria, as well as people start to understand it and make sure that they put in the best application possible. And then the next is to submit your application. The RDA would then review the TDD application. We expect that, they'll probably, at that point, there'll probably some back and forth, some discussions around the project so that there's a full understanding of it. The RDA would then likely approve the application. The MOA, memorandum of agreement that exists already on the TDD would then be amended to record any commitments or requirements for the financial assistance, and then the RDA will release the financial assistance. So kind of that's the continuum that's intended for TDD assistance, financial assistance. So I think I'm going to hand it over to Joe. He's going to talk a little bit more about each of those steps.
Yeah, sure. Dave, if you go to the next slide, that'd be great. This next slide just digs a little bit deeper into that process you saw on the last slide. There's going to be 3 critical steps that the RDA will want to take prior to, potential approval of a TDD financial assistance application. The first really being a pre-application consultation. So, after the applicant emails RDA to request a setup, of a consultation. The goal really of the discussion is to really get the applicant familiar with the application process, explain a little more about the TDD financial assistance that may be available to them for the project, and just understanding high level information about the project and needs. The second is a responsiveness review process. And after the RDA receives an application, they're going to conduct a responsiveness check. And the purpose of that check really is to ensure and assess the project's eligibility for TDD financial assistance. The purpose as well is to verify that the project satisfies, the applicable legislation and submission requirements, which we'll talk about on the next slide. And if needed, request any additional information to have a full kind of review. The third step is an application review and approval process. So, after that responsiveness check is done, any further information is acquired. The RDA is going to take a deeper dive really into the application, understand the project. There's going to be a request for any more clarifications or additional information, and then potentially ask the applicant for an oral presentation to get to know the applicant a little more, the project, and and ask any final clarifications. And then the final step would be recommend to the board for TDD financial assistance approval. Dave, I think we can move on to the next slide. So this slide sets out more about the TDD financial assistance application requirements. And as you'll see at the back end of the program guide, there is a template for the applicant to fill out. But this slide just provides a little more of a higher level overview of what's needed. There's going to be 5 kind of key requirements within this template, an application. The first is being just an introduction. That introduction really just provides an overview of the vision of the project's goals, the type of development, and other important executive summary items. The second is a development proposal, financial plan, and financial model. That'll provide a little more insight to the RDA about the project development, the development schedule, and ultimately how the project will be funded and financed. The third is, if there's a developer for a project, the RDA is going to want to see, the developer's financial capacity. So we're going to ask for financial statements and any history around litigation or bankruptcy, just so that the RDA can understand that the developer can demonstrate, the project's obligations. The fourth is experience capacity. Again, so if there's a developer, we're going to want to see projects of similar scope and size. The fifth requirement here is the market analysis and any lender equity information, letters. That's just really to see support for the development plan and the financial plan. This may include providing the RDA with letters from lenders to demonstrate real support for the project and any history working together. So we want to review that as well. All right, Dave, you can move on to the next slide. Thanks. And so now what are really the potential TDD financial assistance tools that may be available, and what are some of those key parameters around it? The first overarching one is the TDD financial assistance will really be a portion of the project's financial structure, which is anticipated to be no more than 20% of the total project's cost. It'll serve as a last source of funding for any gap remaining in a project's funding after all sources have been utilized. The second key parameter is that like Vince said, that the TDD financial assistance is going to be formalized in an amended MOA between the RDA and the applicant. The loan terms there will be all determined through the underwriting process. And then the third is the TDD financial assistance will be, once it's approved, and it'll be distributed to the applicant or the city or town's redevelopment commission. So those are some of the key parameters. There's a few types of TDD financial assistance that's available. One is TDD grants. So these are, again, cash grants. that can apply to projects, like Vince said, that are either revenue increment generating or non-increment revenue generating. I think Vince talked about a little bit about the non-increment generating projects, such as infrastructure improvement projects. So that's the first tool. The second is TDD loans. So while the RDA is really expecting, the primary repayment sources to be incremental tax revenues from the project, additional repayment sources such as the project's revenue may serve to help repay the TDD loan. These loans are expected to be secured by the same revenues as any other senior debt the project, and the final maturity date wouldn't want to exceed the TDD sunset date, which is 2047. The third is TDD loan pledges. So these are pledges that are, again, sourced from increment tax revenues from the TDD to support all or a portion of the applicant's debt on the project. And if these are drawn upon, there would have to be, repayment would be required. I think that's it for these slides. Are there, for the program guide slides, generally, are there any questions that anybody has on those slides, or any other slides that were talked about on the program guide?
Yes, I do. And forgive me, this is really, really new to me. So I'm trying to figure out everything that's happening. So if the town approaches you with a project that it's the town wants to do, and they get a grant from TDD to do it, that doesn't have to be repaid. It's a grant, right? Am I
Correct.
understanding that correctly? Okay.
Correct. The grant is a grant.
But it doesn't have to necessarily be the town, is what you're saying. It can be a developer who approaches the town, and then the town says, yes, we want you to try to do this project. And so then the town applies because the town is the applicant. Am I following that correctly?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then these developers, though, are also eligible for the grants, the loans, or the loan pledges, not just the town.
Not exactly. So that the town would have to be applying for the grants, the loans on behalf of the developer.
Okay. So the town would be securing the funding. And then how does that work between the town and the developer then? I'm a little confused.
So say in the case of a grant is very straightforward. The town
Right.
applies for a grant and stuff, but let's say if there's a TDD loan, so the town proposes that they wish to use TDD funds to make a loan to the developer, then there would be some form of what I would call a back-to-back agreement. So the town would be borrowing from the TDD, and then there would be also a same agreement between the town and the developer.
Okay, I got it now. That was what I was just trying to understand, how that would work for a developer using the funds. Okay, I got it. I think I have it.
I have a question. The TDD grants in particular, but I guess all of the financial assistance, where does the money for that come from?
So they could come from one of two main sources. I mean, you have the TDD, which is creating the increment, right? The increment is being collected on the incremental property tax and the incremental income tax. So it could either be cash from that, or a commitment of the TDDs. So it could be that cash, or the funding from the TD, those future funds, similar to a TIF, could be leveraged and borrowed against by the TDD to say create those funds.
So any of the financial assistance would be limited to the, increment that's already been collected or projected future increment, which
Correct.
may not, which for a project of a certain size may not amount to 20% of a total project cost.
Yeah. So the TDD funds that are available would be definitely a function of that which the TDD has collected, or, as you said, expected to collect in the future.
Okay.
I have a question. So I guess practically speaking, the TDD grant would be what everybody would want to have because they don't have to pay it back. So is there a limitation on how much would be a grant versus, the loan or the loan pledge?
I don't think it's, as we just said, it's kind of a function of what the TDD has collected and its revenue potential. I mean, with a grant, in theory, the TDD could borrow money itself against future increment and then take the proceeds of that borrowing and make a grant with it. But everything still comes back to a function of how much increment the TDD itself creates. So whether that comes in the form of, it's best done in the form of a grant or in the form of a loan, has to be decided at the time of the project and what it's being used for.
Oh, so just to take that a little bit further, so I guess like in year one, since there's no money or the money hasn't been collected yet, you can't really give a grant because there's no money there to give away. So more than likely in year one, that would be a loan because you're pledging against future revenue.
Or the TDD would borrow against those future revenues and could make a grant or a loan. Yeah.
Okay.
I got another question. So, Valparaiso hasn't identified or defined our TDD boundary, but we're fairly certain that a portion of it is going to overlap with TIF. And the process that is laid out for the TDD, it's great. It's very thorough. And I'm thinking like, if we have these layers of it, what can we do to kind of make all those work together? So I'm thinking, there's a process that our redevelopment commission has to go through, and all the paperwork that has to be done for that. Is this something that the TDD could work with our bond council and our folks that have to do the TIF related stuff, so that we're not having to do double paperwork?
I think, yes, the TDD would need to work in there. I think the devil's in the details there. So it would really come down to where the TIF is and the TDD itself, how they overlap and where they overlap. But I think as we're in the process of actually looking at in Valpo, the various TIFs that exist. And as we set the boundary, we would work with you to kind of, if we could avoid those, we would. If they have to overlap, then that would have to be addressed at that time. I think David Reynolds, I don't know if you're on or have anything to add to that.
Yes, I am on. I guess I don't know if we're gonna, part of this presentation leads into an appendix here that talks about the memo of understanding or memo of agreement that the RDA will enter into with each local unit that has a TDD, and that memorandum of agreement would spell out the arrangements for the splitting of the incremental dollars, as you're talking about, Beth, when a TDD overlays a TIF. And so that would all be spelled out in the memorandum that clearly delineate which dollars remain with the RDC and the TIF, and which incremental dollars would flow on to the RDA when there is an overlap between the TDD and the TIF.
Okay. I just got so many questions. We have a lot of development projects come also working with state organizations to get like tax credits or things like that. And then that would just be layered on this and part of the analysis. So if they were trying to get, I forget what the Dino credits are called now, but something like that, or if it's like a 4% senior or LIHTC, something like that, then that just all goes, you got to layer up all the stuff and then see what's there.
That's
It's
correct. So all
complicated.
so Beth, all the funding sources would stack. That's the goal, is that the TDD dollars would be last dollars in. So you would get your capital stack together, figure out what your gap is, and then the TDD could help fill that gap, of course, help pay for things like infrastructure. We've had conversations with IDC, IHCDA, and other entities. The tax credit, you mentioned the old Dino credit. It's now called the redevelopment tax credit. The state's also rebooting the historic preservation tax credit, which will be operating similar to the redevelopment tax credit. We understand through those agencies that if you're in a TDD boundary, they'll kind of give you an extra point as well because you're in a state economic development boundary. So not only will those capital projects and resources stack together, but at least state entities are favorably viewing being in a TDD.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So David, we've moved on to the MOA slide. I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about on the MOA.
Yeah, as mentioned previously, as part of this presentation, there is a slide that talks about the kind of the next step that the RDA will be doing with each of the TDD communities, and that's entering into a memorandum of agreement that will kind of spell out, as I spoke to earlier, will spell out kind of the rights and responsibilities for the local unit and the RDA, and how to deal with the dollars for when the TDD and the TIF overlap. And then as the TDDs mature, if you will, and as more and more development occurs, each development would then have kind of an amendment to the MOA, spelling out the terms of that specific project, an addendum to the MOA, kind of spelling out the terms of that project and how it may adjust the increment collection and the split between the RDC and the RDA. And so that's kind of the next step of where we'll be going with each of the communities, with the working through this memorandum of agreement. Happy to answer any questions if there's any questions about that.
Hey, Dave, it's Michael Berry, Town of Porter. We emailed some comments back to Dave Wellman, and I know you answered one of those. But is there any, can our comments be sent to everybody and we have a discussion on all those questions so that everybody's aware of what we're looking at and we get all those cleared up for the program guide? Because I would prefer that everybody's aware of the questions we ask and the answers. Most of which have to do with overlap. Yeah.
Yeah. I have no problem with that, Michael. I mean, I'll leave that to Mr. Wellman, but that's fine by me.
Yeah, and I think Beth is asking some of the same questions that, basically we were asking before. But all of the ones we came up with, except for one, were related to TIF overlap. So I'd like to get that out to everybody with an answers back on that so that we're all on the same page. I appreciate
that
it.
would be great too. I agree.
Thanks.
I'll circulate that.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, if there are no more questions,
Dave, over to you.
yeah, thanks, Vince, thanks, Joe. Great discussion, and great presentation. That leads us to our next steps and questions. One thing I would be remiss in not bringing up at this point is when I did have a brief email exchange with Chris Harris earlier today, one thing that he wanted to put on the table was strategizing to help to encourage small businesses and small business development within the TDDs. That's something that Gary is very interested in doing and in encouraging. So I think that I'm not sure if that's discussion for this time, but that may be something that we want to include as an agenda item in the upcoming meeting in August. So we might want to think a little bit about that as we move forward. Steve, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that might be good. Chris just wanted to emphasize that, he wanted this committee to collectively invite, potentially local chambers of commerce and local economic development agencies to discuss the transit development districts and how we can get small business and stakeholders to get involved in investing or expanding their operations within the district. He was just offering up that potential availability and, even having our new renovated suite at the Railcat Stadium to open that up for that as well. But we'll defer to what the committee normally does, and whenever you can get that on the agenda or things like that. That's all I would add to that discussion.
Thank you.
Dave?
Yeah.
Yeah, taking a step back a bit, all the slides that we just went through, that it went through this whole process, are those going to be made available to us to share with others?
The slides or the MOAs?
This whole section here that we went through.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll have this posted on our website. I can send the presentation out after the meeting.
Yeah, if you can send it out, that'd be great.
Sure.
Okay, I am gonna have to get off now, but thank you very much. That was very informative, and yes, I am glad to know that we'll get the slides because I can read through them a little bit better, hopefully answer my own question.
Excellent. If you have any, Tammy, just let us know.
Okay, will do. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
All right. So any other questions, comments, suggestions?
I have another question. It is probably too detailed for this level, but it's on my mind. So like when we go through TIF process, we have our financial advisor and our bond counsel and all that, that the city or our redevelopment commission is comfortable and typically uses. When we go through this process for TDD, is the RDA choosing those consultants, or would the individual municipalities be choosing those?
Beth, oh, go ahead, David. Beth, it's David Reynolds. I think it's gonna depend on each and every project and how how the project is set up and how the funding is flowing. I mean, I would say the RDCs would continue down their same process, if you will, and use the same counsels and financial advisors that they're comfortable with. If it's a major project that the RDC is predominantly funding, if you will. If the project is of large enough scale to where the RDA is providing major financing funding to the project, yes, the RDA is going to use its own bond counsel, the RDA will use its own financial advisors as they do their due diligence to make sure that the project is acceptable for TDD dollars. I mean, my sense is, not that I think we're going to duplicate efforts, but each entity is going to have to do their due diligence and do it with the entities that they're most comfortable with. And
so does RDA's soft costs for that come out of each individual TDD, or is that separate?
No, the costs that would be part of the due diligence of the project would come out of the TDD dollars. And so that's where I was going. I mean, there's also the opportunity of, and we can certainly get into more level of detail as we work with each community on the MOAs as far as what the expectations are and the rights and responsibilities of each of the parties. To look for efficiency, they certainly don't want duplicative exercises if you don't have to have them. But each entity would need to do its own due diligence.
Okay.
I mean, because I would assume that the RDC is going to do its due diligence before it even applies, right? It's going to make sure that this is a project that they want to move forward with, that they believe they have adequate funding for, but for a gap that they're coming to the RDA for. So, I mean, to some degree, the RDC is going to have to do many of the things that they're currently doing just to get the project, you know, moved forward to the TDD application process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this maybe is a very Valpo specific one, but just because we have, I think, so much TIF kind of in the area that is maybe ideal for our TDD. So just thinking about ways to not duplicate, you know, bond issuance, because then we have two separate and then, you know, two separate financial advisors and bond councils, and they're all doing the same thing. And they're just like, doubling our paperwork and costs, and wondering if
Right.
there's like how we would just make that you know, process smooth.
Right. No, I understand. I hear what you're saying, and we can certainly have more focused conversations about that as we get into the MOA.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, anything else? All right, then, Steve, can you gavel us out?
Do you guys normally go through the formal process of a motion, or do you, since we're at the end of our agenda items, do we just formally adjourn without that?
Just meeting adjourned.
All right. I declare this meeting of the RDA TDT Steering Committee adjourned. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Great day.
Thanks all.